I should have known something was wrong the second I walked into my sister Patricia's pristine suburban home that Saturday afternoon. My 9-year-old son Caleb had a dark purple bruise under his left eye that he kept touching nervously. When my family gathered around asking what happened, my 12-year-old nephew Ethan smirked with that entitled expression I'd grown to despise and announced loudly, "I just taught him a lesson. My parents say I'm never wrong anyway." The adults chuckled uncomfortably, brushing off his arrogance as typical kid behavior. Then Caleb quietly said something that made my blood freeze. He also said what Daddy Gerald does to him at night is normal and I should try it too. Silence crashed over the dining room like a tidal wave. Patricia's wine glass slipped from her trembling fingers, red liquid spreading across the white marble floor like spilled blood. The sound of crystal shattering seemed to echo forever in that suffocating silence. I watched my sister Patricia's face cycle through emotions faster than a slot machine landing on something between panic and rage. My brother-in-law Gerald immediately stepped forward, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "What kind of lies have you been filling that boy's head with?" Brett, Gerald's voice carried the authority he used in his accounting firm, but underneath I heard something desperate. My mother Linda rushed to Patricia's side, already pulling paper towels from the kitchen counter. "Oh, honey, don't worry about the mess. Kids say the strangest things, don't they?" Her laugh sounded forced, artificial. My father, Robert, cleared his throat loudly. "Brett's always had an overactive imagination. Looks like Caleb inherited it." The dismissal in his tone made my stomach clench. But I was staring at Caleb, really looking at him for the first time in weeks. The bruise wasn't from normal childhood roughhousing. The way he stood with his shoulders hunched, protecting himself. The dark circles under his eyes that I'd attributed to staying up too late reading. The way he'd been having accidents again after being potty trained for years. "Caleb." I knelt down to his level, ignoring the family's increasingly agitated murmurs. "Can you tell Mommy exactly what happened?" Patricia's mother-in-law Martha appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron. "Now, Brett, don't you go putting ideas in that child's head. Ethan's a good boy, just spirited." Gerald's father, Frank, nodded from his recliner. "Boys will be boys. A little roughhousing never hurt nobody." The unified front forming against me felt suffocating, but Caleb's small voice cut through their protests. "Ethan said the game Uncle Gerald taught him was fun, and I should play it too. But it hurt Mommy, and Ethan said if I told nobody would believe me because I'm just the weird kid." Patricia's face had gone completely white. "Gerald would never... This is ridiculous. Brett, you need to get control of your son before he says something really damaging." I noticed how she said "your son" instead of "our nephew." The possessiveness in her tone, the way she stepped protectively in front of Gerald. Something cold settled in my chest. "What kind of game, sweetheart?" I kept my voice gentle, but my hands were shaking. Caleb glanced nervously at the adults surrounding us. "The touching game, in the basement during movie time. Ethan said all the grown-ups know about it, and it's normal in families." Gerald exploded. "This is insane. I've never touched that boy inappropriately. Patricia, call our attorney Thomas right now. This is slander." My mother's voice turned sharp. "Brett, you're being dramatic again. Just like when you were a teenager, always causing problems where none existed." The words hit me like physical blows. I remembered being 14, trying to tell my parents that something felt wrong about how Uncle Richard touched me at family gatherings. They'd said the same thing then, that I was dramatic attention-seeking. "I'm taking Caleb home," I announced, reaching for my son's hand. Gerald stepped directly into my path, his 6-foot frame blocking the doorway. "I don't think that's a good idea, Brett. You're clearly not thinking straight." Patricia moved to stand beside her husband. "Actually, Gerald's right. We've been discussing this for weeks, haven't we? Mom..." She looked at Linda, who nodded reluctantly. We're concerned about Caleb's welfare. You've been struggling since the divorce, working too much, leaving him with babysitters constantly. My world tilted sideways. What are you talking about? We've already spoken with Thomas about filing for emergency custody. Patricia continued, her voice gaining confidence. Someone needs to protect Caleb from these delusions you're filling his head with. Frank stood up from his chair, suddenly seeming much larger than his 70-year-old frame should allow. Girl, you best be careful about the accusations you're throwing around. This family has a reputation in this town. The threat was unmistakable. I looked around the room at faces I'd known my entire life, searching for one ally, one person who might believe my son. Instead, I saw a wall of denial and something darker, protection of secrets I was only beginning to understand. Martha bustled back from the kitchen with a mop, attacking the wine stain with aggressive efficiency. Such a shame to ruin Patricia's beautiful floors with this nonsense. Some children just have too much imagination for their own good. I realized with dawning horror that they'd been planning this intervention for weeks. The concerned phone calls about Caleb's behavior at school. The suggestions that I was overwhelmed as a single mother. The way they'd been gathering ammunition against me while my son was being hurt. You can't keep me from taking my own child home, I said, but my voice sounded smaller than I intended. Patricia pulled out her phone. Actually, we can. Thomas filed the paperwork yesterday. We're just waiting for the judge's signature on Monday morning. Gerald smiled, and for the first time I saw something predatory in his expression. Don't worry, Brett. We're doing this for Caleb's own good. Sometimes family has to step in when a parent isn't capable of providing proper care. The room felt like it was closing in on me. These people I'd loved and trusted my entire life had orchestrated a plan to take my child away, all to protect whatever sick secret was festering in this house. Caleb tugged on my sleeve. Mommy, can we go home now? I don't like it here anymore. Looking down at my son's frightened face, I knew with absolute certainty that every word he'd spoken was true. The question was whether I'd be strong enough to fight my entire family to protect him. The week that followed felt like living in a nightmare where the monsters wore familiar faces. I'd managed to get Caleb out of Patricia's house that night, but only after promising to bring him back for a supervised visit the following weekend. The legal paperwork Gerald mentioned wasn't filed yet, but the threat hung over me like a sword. At home in our small apartment, I transformed into someone I'd never been before, a detective investigating my own family. I spent hours researching childhood sexual abuse signs online, my stomach churning, as each article described Caleb's recent behavior with devastating accuracy. The bedwetting that had started 3 months ago. His sudden fear of taking baths alone. The way he'd begun hoarding snacks under his bed as if preparing for some unknown crisis. His nightmares about monsters with adult faces that I'd dismissed as normal childhood fears. Caleb, honey, can we talk about what happened at Aunt Patricia's house? I asked Tuesday evening, using the gentle questioning techniques I'd found on child psychology websites. He was coloring at our kitchen table, but his little hands gripped the crayons too tightly. I don't want to get in trouble, Mommy. You won't get in trouble for telling the truth, sweetheart. Mommy promises. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Ethan said the touching game was something all families do, but it made my tummy feel sick. And when I said no, he hit me. Caleb pointed to the fading bruise under his eye. He said Uncle Gerald taught him that hitting makes kids behave better. My hands clenched into fists under the table. Did Uncle Gerald ever touch you like that? Caleb shook his head quickly. No, but Ethan said he wanted to show me what Uncle Gerald showed him. He said I was lucky because most kids don't get to learn the special games until they're older. The calculated nature of it made me sick. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was systematic grooming passed down from adult to child, like some horrific family tradition. I remembered my cousin Diana, Patricia's daughter, from her first marriage. Diana had cut all contact with the family when she turned 18, despite Patricia's tearful pleas. Everyone said Diana was ungrateful and rebellious, but now I wondered if there was more to the story. Finding Diana took 3 days of searching social media and old high school contacts. She lived in Denver now, working as a veterinary technician. When I called, her voice turned cold the moment I mentioned my name. I haven't talked to that family in 7 years, Brett, and I plan to keep it that way. Diana, please. Something happened to Caleb, and I think Gerald might be involved. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, what kind of something? I explained Caleb's disclosure, the family's defensive reaction, their threats of custody action. As I talked, Diana's breathing became more labored. I was 15, she finally said. Gerald cornered me in the basement during Christmas dinner. He said it was normal for stepfathers to help their daughters learn about their bodies. When I told Mom, she accused me of trying to break up her marriage out of jealousy. My heart broke for the 15-year-old girl who'd been betrayed by everyone who should have protected her. Diana, I'm so sorry. I tried telling Grandma Linda and Grandpa Robert too, but they said I was confused. Probably misunderstood something innocent. Gerald was such a pillar of the community, such a good provider for Patricia. How could I destroy a good man's reputation with teenage fantasies? The pattern was becoming clear. The family's first instinct was always to protect their image, their status, their comfort, regardless of who got hurt. There's something else, Diana continued. Gerald's father, Frank, made me uncomfortable too, but in a different way. He'd watch me change through my bedroom window when I stayed over. I caught him twice, but when I told Patricia, she said I was being paranoid. A chill ran down my spine. Diana, would you be willing to testify if this goes to court? Against that entire family, Brett, they'll destroy you. They have money connections reputation. You're a divorced single mother working as a school secretary. Who do you think people will believe? She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't let that stop me. My son is 9 years old, Diana. If I don't fight for him, who will? After Diana agreed to think about testifying, I made an appointment with Dr. Susan Martinez, a child psychologist whose name appeared on several abuse prevention websites. Her office felt safe, filled with soft colors and toys that put children at ease. Dr. Martinez listened to Caleb's disclosure with the serious attention of a professional who'd heard these stories too many times. She used play therapy techniques, dolls, and art to help Caleb express what had happened without traumatizing him further. Based on Caleb's description of events, his behavioral changes, and the physical evidence of the bruising, I'm obligated to file a report with Child Protective Services, Dr. Martinez told me after the session. Caleb shows clear signs of trauma consistent with sexual abuse disclosure. Relief flooded through me. Finally, an adult professional who believed my son. That relief was short-lived. Thursday afternoon, Patricia appeared at my apartment door with 2 police officers and official-looking documents. Mrs. Brett Hamilton, one officer asked, we have a court order for emergency supervised visitation of the minor child Caleb Hamilton. The papers shook in my hands as I read. Patricia and Gerald had convinced a judge that I was mentally unstable, citing my history of attention-seeking behavior and pattern of false accusations against family members. My own parents had signed affidavits stating that I'd always been troubled, prone to dramatic outbursts and fantasy. You can see Caleb for 2 hours every other day under supervision at the family court building, Patricia announced with fake sympathy. This is for his own protection, Brett. You need help. As I watched my son being led away in the back of Patricia's luxury SUV, I realized my family hadn't just been enabling abuse. They'd been actively participating in a conspiracy to silence victims and protect predators. The question was how deep the corruption went and whether I'd be strong enough to expose it all. The Riverside County Family Court building felt like a prison designed by someone with a psychology degree. beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and plastic chairs that squeaked every time you moved. This was where I was allowed to spend 4 hours a week with my own son, under the watchful eye of Margaret Thornton, a court-appointed supervisor who seemed to believe every word Patricia had told her about my instability. "Please remember, Mrs. Hamilton, these visits are for Caleb's benefit," Margaret announced each time, as if I might forget the humiliating circumstances. "Any discussion of your allegations will result in immediate termination of visitation." Caleb looked smaller each time I saw him, more withdrawn. His clothes were expensive now, designer jeans and name-brand sneakers that Patricia bought, to show what a stable environment she could provide. But his eyes held a sadness that no amount of money could fix. "How are you doing at Aunt Patricia's house, sweetheart?" "It's okay," he whispered, glancing nervously at Margaret. "Uncle Gerald bought me a new bike, but I'm not supposed to talk about before." The coded language broke my heart. My 9-year-old son had learned to self-censor to survive. Outside the courthouse, after our second supervised visit, I called the one decent lawyer I could afford, David Murphy, a public defender who looked overwhelmed and exhausted. He explained the legal realities with brutal honesty. "Your sister and brother-in-law hired Blackstone, Pierce and Associates. That's a $500 an hour firm with connections throughout the county. They've painted you as an unstable ex-wife using false abuse allegations to gain custody leverage." "But Martinez filed a CPS report," I protested. "Which Gerald's team is claiming you coached Caleb for. They have 3 character witnesses saying you've always been prone to fantasy and attention-seeking behavior." David rubbed his tired eyes. "Brett, I'm going to be honest with you. Unless we find concrete evidence or additional witnesses, this is going to be very difficult." The financial warfare had begun immediately. My parents called to inform me they were changing their will, removing me entirely because of my destructive behavior toward the family. The small monthly assistance they'd been providing since my divorce was cut off without warning. My boss, Principal Anderson, called me into his office Friday afternoon. His usually kind face looked troubled. "Brett, I've received some concerning phone calls from parents. They're worried about having someone around their children who makes false accusations about family members." The room spun slightly. "Principal Anderson, my son disclosed abuse. I'm trying to protect him." "I understand this is a difficult time for you. I think it would be best if you took an indefinite leave of absence until things settle down." Walking out of Riverside Elementary with my personal items in a cardboard box felt like a public execution. Teachers I'd worked with for 3 years suddenly couldn't make eye contact. Parents whispered behind hands as they picked up their children. Patricia's campaign was working perfectly. In a town of 12,000 people, reputation was everything, and mine was being systematically destroyed. But that weekend, something shifted. Martinez called with news that changed everything. "Brett, I want you to meet someone. Sarah Chen Morrison is a family attorney who specializes in child abuse cases. She works pro bono for families who can't afford representation, and she's very interested in your case." Sarah's office was a stark contrast to David Murphy's cluttered cubicle. Clean lines, expensive furniture, law degrees from Columbia University covering the walls. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. "Dr. Martinez shared Caleb's case details with me with your permission," Sarah began. "I've seen similar situations before. Wealthy families using their resources to silence abuse victims and discredit protective parents." Hope stirred in my chest for the first time in weeks. "You believe my son?" "Absolutely. Children don't fabricate abuse stories with the kind of specific details Caleb provided. But more importantly, I believe we can win this case." Sarah explained her strategy with military precision. "We're going to request a forensic interview for Caleb with a specially trained interviewer. We're going to demand psychological evaluations for both Gerald and Patricia. and we're going to investigate their financial records. Financial records. But abuse cases often involve other criminal behavior. Money troubles, hidden assets, patterns of manipulation. Your family's wealth and influence didn't appear overnight. Diana called that same evening, her voice shaky but determined. I've been thinking about what you said. About fighting for Caleb. I want to help. Diana, are you sure they'll come after you too? Brett. I've been in therapy for years because of what Gerald did to me. I've been angry at myself for not speaking up when it could have mattered. I won't let another child go through what I did. Monday morning brought news that sent shockwaves through our legal case. During a supervised visitation at the courthouse, Caleb asked to use the bathroom. The court supervisor, Margaret Thornton, was momentarily distracted by a phone call, and Ethan, who'd been brought by Patricia for a family bonding session, followed Caleb into the restroom. What happened next was captured on the courthouse security cameras. Ethan cornered Caleb in the bathroom and attempted to assault him using the same grooming language Caleb had described. This is the game Uncle Gerald taught me. Stop being such a baby about it. Caleb's screams brought security running. When confronted by adults, Ethan broke down completely sobbing confessions that turned my blood cold. Uncle Gerald said I had to practice with Caleb because that's what big boys do. He said all dads teach their sons these games, and if I did good, I'd get to be the teacher next time. The courthouse erupted into chaos. Patricia screamed that Ethan was confused, that he was just acting out because of the stress of the custody battle. But the security footage was undeniable, and Ethan's detailed knowledge of sexual acts no 12-year-old should understand contradicted every excuse they tried to make. Gerald was arrested that afternoon at his accounting firm, led out in handcuffs, while his colleagues watched in shock. The local news cameras caught every moment, and suddenly the family's carefully constructed image began crumbling in real time. That night, alone in my apartment, waiting for news about when I could bring Caleb home, I realized the victory felt hollow. Yes, Ethan's breakdown had vindicated my son's disclosure, but it also meant that Boy had been suffering in silence for years, while adults failed to protect him. The real battle was just beginning. Gerald's arrest was only the first domino to fall. Sarah warned me that Patricia's family would close ranks even tighter, now fighting not just to protect Gerald, but to save themselves from whatever secrets were still buried in their perfect suburban fortress. The arrest of Gerald Winters made front-page news in the Riverside Gazette, complete with a photo of him being led away from Winters and Associates Accounting in handcuffs. Prominent local businessman charged with child sexual abuse, read the headline that shattered any remaining illusions about my family's respectability. Within 24 hours, Child Protective Services launched a full investigation that expanded far beyond Gerald's direct actions. Sarah had been right about following the money trail, and what investigators discovered painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached back decades. Patricia's response to her husband's arrest shocked everyone, including me. Instead of the grief or betrayal you'd expect from a wife discovering her husband was a predator, Patricia immediately went into damage control mode. She hired a separate attorney to distance herself from Gerald's actions while maintaining his innocence. Gerald is a good man who's being destroyed by false accusations, she told Channel 7 News outside the courthouse. My sister has always been unstable, and now she's using her own child to attack my family out of jealousy. But Patricia's carefully crafted public statements crumbled when investigators searched both houses on Maple Street. Gerald's home office contained a computer with hundreds of images and videos documenting abuse, not just of Ethan and Caleb, but of other children from their church and neighborhood. The FBI's Digital Crimes Unit determined that Gerald had been part of an online network trafficking child exploitation materials. The revelation that the abuse was documented and shared online escalated the case to federal jurisdiction. Special Agent Rebecca Santos called me to explain the expanded investigation. Mrs. Hamilton, what we're uncovering suggests your brother-in-law was operating more than just a local abuse situation. The materials on his computer indicate involvement with a nationwide network of offenders who share victims and techniques. My stomach churned. How many other children? We're still identifying victims, but preliminary evidence suggests at least 15 local children over the past 8 years. Your son's disclosure likely prevented many more children from being victimized. The scope of Gerald's crimes made Patricia's continued defense of him even more disturbing. When FBI agents interviewed her separately, she maintained that she'd never seen anything suspicious about Gerald's behavior with children, despite living in the same house where much of the documented abuse occurred. But Diana's decision to testify changed everything. During her formal interview with investigators, she revealed details about Gerald's behavior that shattered Patricia's claims of ignorance. Patricia walked in on Gerald touching me when I was 15, Diana told the FBI. I was crying and trying to push him away, and Patricia got angry at me for seducing her husband. She said I was a manipulative teenager trying to break up her marriage. The interview revealed that Patricia hadn't just failed to protect Diana. She'd actively blamed the victim and enabled Gerald's continued access to children. When investigators confronted Patricia with Diana's account, her story began changing. Dr. Martinez was conducting therapeutic interviews with Ethan, trying to help him process the trauma of being both victim and perpetrator. What emerged from those sessions painted an even darker picture of the family dynamics. Ethan describes a household where Gerald's sexual abuse was normalized through gradual conditioning, Dr. Martinez explained to me during one of our consultations. Patricia wasn't just aware of the abuse. She participated in the psychological manipulation that made it possible. According to Ethan's disclosures, Patricia would often leave him alone with Gerald under the pretense of giving them father-son bonding time. She'd praise Ethan for being mature for his age when he stopped resisting Gerald's advances. Most disturbingly, she'd begun grooming him to victimize other children by praising him for being a good teacher when he practiced Gerald's techniques on younger victims. The financial investigation Sarah had requested revealed another layer of criminal activity. Gerald had been embezzling funds from his accounting firm's client accounts to pay for legal fees, potential settlements with victims' families, and expenses related to the online exploitation network. Patricia had helped hide these stolen funds by purchasing expensive jewelry artwork and a rental property in Florida under her maiden name. They've been planning this cover-up for years, Sarah explained during a meeting at her office. The custody action against you wasn't spontaneous. They started building a case against your mental stability months ago, probably when Gerald suspected he was being investigated. My mother Linda's role in the conspiracy became clear when investigators interviewed her. Under pressure, she admitted that Gerald had confided in her about his attraction to young people years earlier, but she'd convinced herself it was just inappropriate thoughts that he'd never act on. Linda knew, I said to Sarah, feeling the last of my childhood illusions crumble. My own mother knew Gerald was dangerous and still supported the custody action. It gets worse, Sarah replied grimly. When we interview Robert, I suspect we'll find this pattern of abuse and enablement goes back even further. She was right. My father Robert's interview with FBI agents revealed that the family's history of abuse and cover-ups spanned generations. Robert admitted to sexually abusing neighborhood children during the 1970s and 80s, using his position as a youth baseball coach to access victims. Gerald had learned from Robert's techniques, and the two had even shared victims on several occasions. Martha and Frank Gerald's parents, living next door, had been aware of their son's criminal behavior from the beginning. Frank had introduced Gerald to the online network of predators, and Martha had helped destroy evidence and intimidate potential witnesses over the years. The revelation that 3 generations of my family had been involved in systematic child abuse left me reeling. Every family gathering, every holiday celebration, every moment of my childhood had been tainted by the knowledge that the adults around me were either perpetrating or enabling horrific crimes. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators found Patricia's personal journal hidden in a safety deposit box, registered under a false name. The journal detailed not just her knowledge of Gerald's abuse, but her active participation in recruiting victims and planning cover-ups. Patricia was never Gerald's victim, Agent Santos explained during my briefing. She was his partner. The journal shows she specifically targeted vulnerable children from troubled families, knowing they'd be less likely to be believed if they disclosed abuse. Reading excerpts from Patricia's journal felt like discovering my sister was a stranger. She'd written detailed plans for discrediting me if Caleb ever disclosed abuse, including strategies for convincing courts I was mentally unstable and coaching witnesses to testify against my character. As federal charges were filed against Gerald, Patricia, Robert Frank, and Martha Y., struggled to process the magnitude of the conspiracy I'd unknowingly lived within my entire life. 5 members of my family were arrested within a week, charged with crimes ranging from child sexual exploitation to conspiracy to obstruct justice. The local media coverage was relentless. Riverside family's dark secret and multi-generational abuse ring exposed filled newspaper headlines and television broadcasts. Some community members apologized for initially doubting my allegations, but others blamed me for destroying a prominent family's reputation. Through it all, Caleb remained my primary concern. Dr. Martinez worked with him daily, helping him understand that he'd been brave to speak up and that the adult's arrest meant they could never hurt him again. But I knew the healing process would take years, and some scars might never fully fade. The night after Patricia's arrest, I sat in Caleb's bedroom watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in months. His nightmares had stopped once he understood that the monsters with adult faces were gone forever. But I knew that rebuilding our lives would require more than just putting the perpetrators in prison. The federal investigation expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. Special Agent Santos called me on a rainy Wednesday morning with news that made my hands shake so badly I dropped my coffee mug. "Mrs. Hamilton, we've traced the network Gerald was involved with to 17 states. Your family's abuse ring was one of the largest we've encountered in this region." The scope was staggering. FBI raids across multiple states led to dozens of arrests, hundreds of victims identified, and the seizure of thousands of pieces of evidence documenting years of organized child exploitation. Gerald hadn't just been a local predator. He'd been a regional coordinator for an interstate network that traded victims, shared techniques, and protected each other from prosecution. Patricia's role in this network became clear when investigators decoded encrypted communications found on Gerald's computer. She'd been recruiting vulnerable children from our town's social services system, identifying kids from broken homes or foster care situations who could be victimized without triggering immediate investigations. Your sister had access to confidential information through her volunteer work with the church's outreach program, Agent Santos explained. She was specifically targeting children whose parents were struggling with addiction, mental illness, or domestic violence. The calculating nature of Patricia's predatory behavior made me physically ill. While I'd seen her as my successful older sister with a perfect life, she'd been systematically identifying and delivering innocent children to monsters. But the most devastating revelation came during my father Robert's full confession to FBI investigators. Under federal immunity in exchange for cooperation, he revealed that the abuse in our family went back 3 generations and included dozens of victims spanning 40 years. Your grandfather Thomas was the one who started it all, Agent Santos told me during a meeting at the federal building. Robert learned from him, Gerald learned from Robert, and they were grooming Ethan to continue the cycle. The family business had been a cover for much more than accounting. Robert and Gerald had been laundering money for the abuse network, hiding payments to victims' families, legal fees, and profits from exploitation materials. The comfortable lifestyle I'd grown up with was built on the systematic destruction of innocent children. Dr. Martinez helped me understand the psychological impact of learning my entire family history was a lie. Brett, you're experiencing a form of trauma called betrayal trauma. Everything you thought you knew about your family, your childhood, and your identity has been revealed as false. The therapy sessions became essential as I struggled with memories that suddenly had new, horrific context. The family camping trips where children mysteriously got lost and were found hours later by the adult men. The basement parties where kids were encouraged to play hide and seek while adults drank upstairs. The way certain children stopped coming to family gatherings without explanation. I was living in the middle of it and never saw it, I told Dr. Martinez through tears. How could I have been so blind? Children normalize whatever environment they grow up in, she explained gently. You survived by unconsciously blocking out signs that would have been obvious to an outside observer. Your mind protected you the only way it could. Media attention intensified when the case went national. Prominent Midwest family-led multi-state abuse network appeared on CNN, Fox News, and major newspapers across the country. Reporters camped outside my apartment trying to get interviews about growing up in America's most dangerous family. The community reaction split along predictable lines. Some neighbors expressed shock and support, bringing meals and offering help with Caleb's care. Others blamed me for betraying family secrets and destroying Riverside's reputation as a safe small town. My employer, the school district, placed me on indefinite administrative leave pending the outcome of all investigations. It's not that we don't believe you, Principal Anderson explained awkwardly, but parents are concerned about having someone connected to this case working around their children. The isolation was crushing. My entire extended family was either arrested under investigation or refusing to speak to me for causing this mess. Old friends distanced themselves, unsure how to react to the shocking revelations. Some days, Caleb and I felt like we were the only survivors of a war that had been raging around us for years. Diana became my lifeline during this period. Having survived her own trauma and built a healthy life despite it, she understood the complex emotions I was experiencing. The hardest part isn't the anger, she told me during one of our long phone conversations. It's the grief for the family you thought you had. You have to mourn people who are still alive, but were never who you believed them to be. Sarah kept me informed about the legal proceedings as charges multiplied. Gerald faced federal charges for child exploitation, conspiracy money laundering, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Patricia was charged with conspiracy child endangerment and being an accessory to multiple felonies. Robert faced charges dating back decades, including statute of limitations violations for his historical crimes. The prosecution is recommending life sentences for Gerald and your father, Sarah explained. Patricia will likely serve 15 to 20 years if she accepts a plea agreement. The victims' impact statements began arriving as the federal prosecution prepared its case. Dozens of now adult survivors wrote about the lasting damage Robert, Gerald, and Patricia had inflicted on their lives. Reading their stories, I recognized patterns of manipulation and abuse that I'd somehow lived alongside without recognizing. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators found evidence that my own childhood had been documented and shared within the network. Hidden cameras in our family home had recorded abuse that I'd completely suppressed from conscious memory. Dr. Martinez worked with me to recover these memories safely, helping me understand that my childhood amnesia had been a survival mechanism. You were victimized too, Brett, she explained after reviewing FBI evidence. Your mind completely blocked out traumatic experiences that were too overwhelming to process as a child. The recovered memories explained so much about my adult struggles. My difficulty trusting people, my pattern of minimizing problems, rather than confronting them, my tendency to blame myself when others mistreated me. I'd been conditioned from birth to accept abuse as normal and to protect the perpetrators rather than seek help. As federal agents prepared to arrest Martha and Frank Gerald's parents, attempted suicide rather than face prosecution. Frank died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, but Martha survived and was hospitalized under psychiatric care. Their final desperate act felt like the last domino falling in a conspiracy that had consumed my family for generations. Standing in my apartment that night, watching Caleb play peacefully with toys Diana had sent him, I realized that breaking the cycle of abuse had required destroying everything I'd once called family. The price of exposing evil had been losing every familiar relationship in my life. But for the first time since childhood, I felt genuinely safe. The monsters weren't just defeated. They were exposed, prosecuted, and removed from society permanently. The nightmare was ending, and both Caleb and I could finally begin healing from wounds we'd carried for far too long. The federal convictions came down like thunder 6 months after Gerald's arrest. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Gerald to life in federal prison without possibility of parole, calling his crimes a systematic assault on childhood innocence that demands the harshest possible punishment. Patricia received 25 years for conspiracy and child endangerment. Robert got 15 years despite his age, with the judge noting that his decades of abuse had created the foundation for a multi-generational criminal enterprise. Standing in that courthouse, listening to the sentences, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The complete validation of speaking truth, no matter how painful. Every doubt, every moment of wondering if I was destroying my family over misunderstandings, every sleepless night, worrying I'd made terrible mistakes, all of it vanished in the face of justice finally served. But criminal convictions were only the beginning of the fight I was determined to win. Dr. Martinez connected me with other families whose children had been victimized by the network. Meeting these parents, seeing their strength and determination to protect other children, inspired me to transform my personal tragedy into something meaningful for other survivors. Brett, you have a unique perspective, explained Jennifer Walsh, whose daughter had been abused by one of Gerald's network contacts in Ohio. You survived growing up in this environment and still retained enough moral clarity to protect your son when it mattered most. Other parents need to hear your story. With Sarah's legal guidance and Dr. Martinez's psychological support, I began developing what would become the Caleb Foundation, a nonprofit organization focused on helping families navigate the complex trauma of abuse disclosure and prosecution. Our mission was simple. No child should ever be silenced by family pressure, and no protective parent should face the battle alone that I'd been forced to fight. The civil lawsuits against Gerald, Patricia, and Robert's estates moved forward aggressively. Sarah filed claims not just for Caleb and me, but for dozens of identified victims spanning decades. The financial damages were staggering millions of dollars in therapy costs, lost wages, medical expenses, and compensation for lifelong trauma. We're not just seeking money, Sarah explained to the media. We're ensuring that crime doesn't pay and that victims receive the resources they need to heal and rebuild their lives. The Winters family's assets were substantial. The accounting firm, multiple properties, investment accounts, and valuable artwork purchased with stolen money. The court ordered everything liquidated to pay victim compensation, leaving Patricia and Gerald's extended family financially devastated, but ensuring survivors received tangible support for their recovery. My testimony before the Nebraska State Legislature became a turning point in child protection advocacy. Invited to speak about family-based abuse networks and institutional failures that enable them, I shared Caleb's story and my own experience of being disbelieved by people who should have protected us. Honorable representatives, the greatest threat to children often comes not from strangers, but from trusted family members and community leaders who use their status to silence victims, I told the packed hearing room. We need laws that require mandatory reporting training for teachers, clergy, and anyone working with families, and we need legal protections for parents who report abuse within their own families. My testimony helped pass the Child Protection Enhancement Act, requiring annual training for educators and religious leaders about recognizing and reporting abuse signs. The law also created legal immunity for parents reporting suspected abuse, preventing the custody retaliation I'd experienced from being used as a weapon against protective mothers and fathers. Caleb's healing became my daily inspiration. With consistent therapy and the security of knowing his abusers were imprisoned, he began showing the resilience that amazed everyone around him. Dr. Martinez described his recovery as exceptional, particularly his ability to maintain empathy and trust, despite what he'd endured. "Mommy, I want to help other kids like Dr. Martinez helps me," Caleb told me one evening while we worked on a puzzle together. Maybe when I grow up, I can teach grown-ups how to listen when kids tell them important things. His wisdom and strength reminded me daily why the fight had been worthwhile. This beautiful, brave boy had found his voice at 9 years old and used it to expose a multi-generational conspiracy. His courage had saved not just himself, but dozens of other children who might have become victims. The Caleb Foundation grew rapidly as word spread about our comprehensive approach to supporting abuse survivors and their families. We provided legal referrals, therapy connections, financial assistance for families facing custody battles, and educational programs for schools and community organizations. Diana joined our board of directors using her experience as both a survivor and a successful professional to help other adult victims rebuild their lives after exposing family abuse. Her speaking engagements about breaking cycles of secrecy and shame reached thousands of people struggling with similar situations. "The hardest part isn't surviving the abuse," Diana told audiences across the region. "It's surviving the disclosure when your own family chooses to protect perpetrators instead of victims. But I'm here to tell you that choosing truth over family loyalty is the most powerful thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for future generations." The media attention around our case continued generating positive change beyond our immediate community. The FBI credited our investigation with breaking up abuse networks in 12 states, leading to over 60 arrests and the rescue of hundreds of children from ongoing victimization. Agent Santos invited me to speak at FBI training conferences about recognizing family-based abuse networks and the importance of believing children's disclosures even when they implicate respected community members. Mrs. Hamilton's case demonstrates that predators often specifically cultivate reputations as upstanding citizens to shield their crimes, she explained to federal agents learning about organized abuse investigations. The most dangerous offenders are often the ones who seem least likely to harm children. Principal Anderson, who had initially pressured me to take leave from my school position personally, apologized and invited me back to work. The school board also asked me to develop new protocols for supporting families dealing with abuse disclosures, ensuring that no other parent would face the institutional abandonment I'd experienced. "Brett, we failed you and Caleb when you needed support most," Principal Anderson admitted during a public school board meeting. "Your courage in speaking truth, despite overwhelming pressure, has made our entire community safer for children." But the victory that meant the most came 18 months after Gerald's arrest, when Caleb asked to attend one of my speaking engagements at a conference for child protection professionals. Standing at that podium, looking out at social workers, law enforcement officers, and therapists who dedicate their lives to protecting children, I saw my son in the audience giving me 2 thumbs up. "My name is Brett Hamilton, and my son Caleb is the reason we're all here today," I began. When a 9-year-old boy found the courage to speak truth about family secrets, he didn't just save himself. He saved every child who will be protected because of the changes we've made together. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but it wasn't for me. It was for Caleb, for every survivor who'd found the strength to speak, and for the possibility that truth could triumph over even the most powerful conspiracies of silence and denial. Looking at my son's proud smile, I knew that breaking my family's cycle of abuse hadn't just freed us from a nightmare. It had created something beautiful, a future where children's voices matter more than adult secrets, where protection matters more than reputation, and where love means safety rather than silence. 3 years have passed since that terrible birthday party when my world changed forever, and today I'm sitting in the sunlight filtering through the windows of our new home in Lincoln, Nebraska. Caleb, now 12 years old, is at the kitchen table finishing his homework, while humming quietly to himself. The sound of his contentment fills spaces in my heart that I didn't even know were empty. The house we live in now was purchased with settlement money from the civil suits against my family's criminal enterprise. It's modest but beautiful, with a big backyard where Caleb can play safely, and a home office where I run the Caleb Foundation. Every morning when I wake up here, I'm reminded that sometimes justice includes rebuilding your entire life from the ground up. James Morrison came into our lives 2 years ago when he spoke at one of our foundation conferences. A trauma counselor who'd survived childhood sexual abuse himself, he understood the complex journey of healing in ways that most people never could. When he asked me to dinner after his presentation, I almost said no out of habit, still learning to trust my instincts about people. "I'm not ready to date," I told him honestly. "I'm still figuring out how to have healthy relationships after learning my entire family was built on lies and manipulation." His response surprised me. "Then let's just be friends who support each other's work. I'm not going anywhere, Brett. Survivors need to stick together." Our friendship grew naturally over months of working together on trauma education programs. James never pushed for more than I could offer, never made me feel guilty for needing time to heal, never tried to fix problems I needed to solve myself. When our relationship eventually became romantic, it happened at my pace, built on the foundation of genuine respect and shared values. We married last fall in a small ceremony at our house, surrounded by the chosen family we'd built from fellow survivors, dedicated professionals, and friends who understood that real family protects and nurtures, rather than exploiting and silencing. Caleb walked me down the aisle, proud to give me away to someone who'd earned his trust through consistent kindness and reliability. "James makes you smile like you used to before everything got scary, Mommy." Caleb had told me when I asked how he felt about James becoming his stepfather. "And he listens to me like you do, like what I say matters." The Caleb Foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined possible. We now operate in 6 states, providing comprehensive support to families dealing with abuse disclosures and prosecutions. Our programs include legal advocacy therapy referrals, financial assistance, educational workshops, and peer support groups for both child survivors and protective parents. The federal grant we received last year allows us to expand nationwide within the next 5 years. My story has become a case study in graduate social work programs, training future professionals to recognize institutional failures that enable family-based abuse and to support protective parents facing isolation and retaliation. But our most important program remains the one closest to my heart, teaching children about body safety consent and the importance of telling trusted adults when someone hurts them. Caleb occasionally joins me at these presentations, sharing his experience in age-appropriate ways that help other children understand they have the right to be protected. I was scared to tell at first because the grown-up seemed to like the person who hurt me, he told a group of third graders last month. But my mom taught me that grown-ups who really love kids want them to be safe, even if the truth makes things complicated. His wisdom continues to amaze me. Dr. Martinez says his recovery has been remarkable because we addressed the trauma immediately, and because he never doubted that I believed him. The combination of validation therapy and safety allowed his natural resilience to flourish, rather than being buried under shame and secrecy. Caleb's relationship with James has developed beautifully. James never tried to replace his biological father, but instead became the stable male role model Caleb needed to understand that men can be trustworthy and safe. They share interests in science and building model airplanes, and James teaches Caleb that healthy masculinity includes protecting others and expressing emotions honestly. The legal aftermath of our case continues to generate positive changes throughout the justice system. Gerald died in federal prison last year, killed by other inmates who learned about his crimes against children. Patricia remains incarcerated, eligible for parole in 15 years. She's never expressed remorse or admitted responsibility for her actions, maintaining even now that she was somehow victimized by circumstances beyond her control. Robert, my father suffered a stroke in prison and now requires constant medical care. I've never visited him, though. I pray for his victims and hope he's found some way to acknowledge the harm he caused. The man I thought was my loving father never existed. He was a carefully constructed facade hiding a monster who hurt children for decades. The adult survivors from my family's network have stayed in touch, forming an extended community of people who understand the unique trauma of systematic betrayal by those who should have protected us. We support each other through holidays, anniversaries of disclosures, and the ongoing process of redefining family on our own terms. Diana has become like a sister to me in ways Patricia never was. She moved to Nebraska 2 years ago to help run the Foundation's survivor advocacy program. Watching her work with adult survivors, I'm constantly inspired by her strength and her commitment to ensuring that what we endured serves some greater purpose. Every time we help another family break free from abuse and silence, we honor all the children who didn't have voices to speak for them. Diana often tells the survivors she counsels, "Our healing becomes their justice." The community where I grew up has changed dramatically since our case exposed the corruption that existed beneath its surface. New child protection protocols, mandatory reporting training, and citizen oversight committees ensure that status and wealth can never again shield predators from accountability. Several families have moved away, unable to cope with the shattering of their illusions about Riverside's safety and innocence. Caleb starts middle school next month, and he's excited rather than anxious about the transition. His teachers describe him as empathetic, confident, and naturally protective of younger children. He wants to become a psychologist like Dr. Martinez, when he grows up dedicating his life to helping other trauma survivors heal and thrive. I think I can help kids because I remember what it felt like to be scared and not know if grown-ups would believe me, he told me recently. But I also remember how good it felt when you believed me and fought to keep me safe. I want other kids to feel that good feeling too. Last week we received a letter from the mother of a 7-year-old girl in Oregon, whose grandfather was sexually abusing her. The child disclosed the abuse after attending one of our school presentations about body safety. The grandfather was arrested, and the little girl is receiving therapy and support from her family. "Your son's bravery gave my daughter permission to speak up," the mother wrote. "Thank you for turning your trauma into something that saves other children." These letters arrive regularly, now reminders that breaking my family's conspiracy of silence created ripple effects that continue protecting innocent children. Every successful prosecution, every child believed and protected, Every family that chooses truth over reputation represents another victory against the forces that nearly destroyed us. As I finish writing this story, Caleb looks up from his homework and asks, "Mommy, do you think kids who hear your speeches understand that they're allowed to tell when grown-ups do bad things to them?" "I hope so, sweetheart. What do you think?" "I think they do because you talk to them like they're smart and important, not like they're just little kids who don't understand things." He pauses thoughtfully. "I'm glad I told you what happened, even though it made everything scary for a while." "Me too, Caleb. You were the bravest person I've ever known." "You were brave too, Mommy. You believed me even when everybody else said not to." In that moment, I understand that real family isn't about blood relations or shared genetics. It's about people who choose to protect each other, who prioritize safety over comfort, who speak truth even when silence would be easier. James, Caleb, Diana, Dr. Martinez, Sarah, and all the survivors and advocates we work with. They're my true family, bound together by love rather than secrecy, by healing rather than harm. The life we've built from the ashes of my biological family's destruction is more beautiful than anything that came before. It's built on honesty instead of lies, protection instead of exploitation, and love that empowers rather than controls. Breaking the cycle of abuse required losing everything familiar, but it gave us something infinitely more valuable: the freedom to define family as a source of strength and safety. I've learned that speaking truth, even when it destroys everything you thought you knew, is the only way to build something genuinely beautiful from genuine foundations. The price of exposing evil was losing my birth family, but the reward was gaining authentic relationships based on honesty, respect, and mutual protection. Tonight, after Caleb goes to bed, James and I will sit on our back porch planning next year's foundation programs, discussing ways to reach more families, protect more children, and support more survivors. We'll talk about the speaking engagement requests from other states, the new research partnerships with universities, and the legislative initiatives that could strengthen child protection laws nationwide. But mostly, we'll sit quietly together, grateful for the peace that comes from knowing that the children sleeping safely in our home and homes across the country are a little safer because we found the courage to speak up when it mattered most. To anyone listening who might be questioning whether strange behavior in their family deserves investigation, whether children's concerning statements should be taken seriously, or whether protecting a child is worth the potential cost of disrupting family relationships, I want you to know that children's safety must always come before adult comfort. Your instincts about protecting children are worth trusting, even when everyone around you suggests otherwise. The temporary chaos of addressing abuse is nothing compared to the lifetime of healing required when children aren't believed or protected when they need it most. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting someone vulnerable? How do you think communities can better support parents who report abuse within their own families? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or helped you understand the complexity of family-based abuse, please like this video to help it reach other families who might need to hear this message. Subscribe to stay connected with stories about survivors who transform their trauma into strength for others. And please share this with anyone who works with children or families, because awareness is the first step in preventing these tragedies. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and for believing that children's voices matter more than family secrets. Together, we can create a world where every child knows they deserve to be safe, believed, and protected, no matter who might be causing them harm. Until next time, remember that your courage to speak truth can change everything. Not just for you, but for every innocent life your voice has the power to protect.